All right, we are going to get started. We have just a few housekeeping notes for you today. Attendees will receive a certificate of completion via email within 10 business days of this webinar. It is for 1 continuing education credit, and it should transfer to your personal state licenses and certifications, but you must confirm this with those entities. If you registered for this event but are watching in a group through someone else's device, WebEx may not count you as an attendee. So just drop us an email at marketing@brightviewhealth.com to let us know. And I will put that in the chat in just a second so everyone has it. You will also receive a copy of the slides with your certificate. And if you have any questions today, please ask them via the chat, and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible at the end of today's discussion. Thanks again for joining us for our virtual forum today. Emerging drug trends, Kratom, Tianeptine, and other gray market substances. We are pleased to introduce our presenter today, one of BrightView's medical directors, Dr. Gilbert Schmidt. Dr. Schmidt?
Thank you for the introduction and handoff. So you're seeing my bio, and no one wants to hear about my career, but if you'll indulge me for a second, I'll just talk a minute about it. One of the things you'll notice is that I've done multiple things in my my career, both in medicine and outside of it. So my common line about this is that I'm a recovering ER physician and I'm a recovering lawyer. And I use those prior experiences to inform my practice as an addiction medicine specialist, keeping in mind what Mark Twain said, we should all take to heart. The most important day in your life is the day you're born. The second most important day is the day you figure out why. 10 years ago, I had the privilege of figuring out why. I don't know whether I found addiction medicine or it found me, but either way, that's what happened to me, and I found my calling. So it's in that spirit of commitment to these patients and love of our field that I'm here to kind of talk a little bit about some of these substances that when I first started this 10 years ago weren't around and we didn't have to deal with. So our work continues to evolve and get endlessly complex. So let's just jump right into it and get to work. We got a lot of covering in a fairly short period of time. I'm very mindful of your time. Okay, I'm ready. Okay, so this is the agenda. We won't spend a lot of time on it. Everyone knows we'll talk primarily about Kratom. I'm going to try to get to Tianeptine, Phenibut, and dextromethorphan, time permitting. But they'll be there even if we don't. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to sort of identify these substances and understand their addiction dependence potential, recognize how they present, and then use appropriate screening treatment considerations, and then also understand the regulatory and public safety implications of all of them. We'll cover each of those 4 topics, hopefully for each of these substances. Okay, ready? Okay. Everybody's heard of Kratom these days. I think if you drive around town, you drive past head shops, you see the neon signs. It's hard to miss. In Thailand, so this gets into the question, what do we call things and names? And most of us know medications have a trade name, they have generic names, they might have 5 or 6 different names they go by. Kratom is interesting in the way that this is the actual name from Thailand, and it's been called Kratom. It was originally spelled K-A-R-A-T-H-O-M, but it's been anglicized to Kratom. This is literally the local name of this plant that started in the 19th century. Now, one of the issues we have to deal with is we're not going to call it Kratom, we're going to call it a mitragynine. So how to pronounce mitragynine is a little bit of a challenge. There's, for me in the medical field, G and Y together, the G is hard, so I'm going to call it mitragynine species. You might call it something different. Interestingly, this plant is a member of the coffee family. It's native to Southeast Asia, indigenous to Cambodia and Thailand, Indonesia. It's been used since the 19th century, not unlike the coca plant in South America. It's been consumed by natives in these areas by chewing and smoking or in tea. And in Asia, it was and has been used to provide energy, work stamina, relief of fatigue, and pain as a folk remedy. Okay. We're going to jump into the pharmacology of it. I know many of you are not chemists or medical professionals, but I think it's still worth covering this. So the leaves of the Kratom plant have 40 different alkaloids. What's an alkaloid? An alkaloid is a naturally occurring organic compound that has at least one nitrogen atom, usually in a ring, like you see here represented on the right. These are basically have alkaline chemistry in nature, and so that's why the name alkaloid was caused. They're usually derived from amino acids. They're natural, they're in plants, fungi, and bacteria, and they have physiologic activity in all animals, especially mammals. So in the Kratom leaf, there are these 40 alkaloids. The most abundant one is mitragynine or Kratom. It accounts for about 1 to 2% of the content of the leaf when it's dried. And another compound called 7-hydroxymitragynine, or we just call it it's 7-OH, so it's commonly called 7-OH, which is shortened up to that. It's in very minuscule amounts and probably only occurs because of the drying process itself. It's probably actually not really in the leaf as it occurs in nature. However, this is important as we continue through the slides. The 7-OH hydroxymitragynine is 13 times more potent than the underlying chemical itself, mitragynine, and it does cross the blood-brain barrier. So how does this stuff work? It's absorbed orally when you take it as a tea or a leaf. It's bioavailability means how much of it is actually absorbed. We think it's about 20%. And the half-life is 3 to 9 hours, meaning it's going to be active in the bloodstream for about 3 to 9 hours. It's excreted in the urine, metabolized in the liver. And we'll talk a little bit about drug testing later on, but maybe just to mention here, one of the problems with this is that it doesn't stay in the body very long. It stays about, in a heavy user, 5 to 7 days. For an intermittent user, just a couple days, so it's not around very long. And the other point, I'm going to throw it out here, and we'll come back to it, is that routine 5, 10, or 12 panel drug testing that most of us do, the rapid drug testing, does not include kratom. And these kratom alkaloids do not reliably cross-react with the opioid immunoassays that we are doing on our cups. There's been the occasional false positive, but it's uncommon and inconsistent. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, let's go. I think we got, yeah, here we go. So how does it work? What's the pharmacology of this drug? So on nerve cells in our body, there's a protein called the mu receptor. And this mu receptor binds opioids, whether they're natural, synthetic, or semi-synthetic. And when they're activated, a bunch of things happen. One, pain is relieved. Sometimes euphoria is created. And if the substance is used in this receptor and higher repeatedly, then tolerance develops, meaning that more of the substance is required to activate the receptor. Then develops dependence, overdose risk, and this is the target substance for the drugs that we all commonly know: heroin, fentanyl, morphine, kratom alkaloids, tianeptine, and other drugs are activated at the mu receptor. Now, for kratom, it has analgesic and mild euphoria, and then sedation at higher doses. It has a ceiling effect, interestingly, like buprenorphine, meaning that more and more of the substance typically doesn't result in respiratory depression. And then it's the chemical that I mentioned before, the 7-hydroxymitragynine, is a very potent mu receptor agonist, estimated at 10 to 40 times the potency of morphine, for example. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, what are its effects? So from the leaf, if you had a kratom leaf, which I've never seen in person, and probably no one on this call has, but if you use it like it's used in Southeast Asia, if you get just 1 to 5 grams of it, you get a stimulant-like effect. So it's adrenergic, your heart rate goes up, your pupils become pinpoint, and you're more active, more alert, have more energy. That's what it was used for primarily. Moderate doses, from 5 to 15 grams from the leaf, then it can begin to have these analgesic, and for non-medical people, that means relief of pain. Euphoria, we all know. Anxiolytic effects mean reduction in anxiety. So at these moderate doses, it acts like any other opioid, like oxycodone or heroin, other opioids. So it has pain-relieving, euphoria-producing, and anxiety-reducing effects. At high doses, 15 grams or more, now it becomes a really potent analgesic, causes nausea and physical dependence. Okay, next one, please. This is a really important point, and we're going to spend some time on this slide. Patterns of use. So in the last data that we have, in 2022, about 2 million Americans reported use of kratom in the prior year. That was 4 years ago. And those people who purchase and use it do so to treat their mood, they use it to address pain, and primarily, in my opinion, they use it to address opioid withdrawals. And this data came from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, and the market and industry estimates are much higher, that 15 to 20 million Americans have used kratom at one time. Now, the issue with kratom probably would not be what it is, and we wouldn't be talking about it in this call if it weren't for these newer concentrated products, and especially the 7-hydroxymitragynine. We're going to get to that. But it's definitely a billion-dollar industry as of 2022. It's probably far bigger today, and I don't see any sign of it stopping. So let's just talk about, for a second, distribution across the population. There was this question submitted that was very insightful, and I just want to touch on this. So it's not evenly distributed across the population. There's fairly consistent age and other factors. The most common age profile is adults 18 to 50. Peak use is consistently found among young and middle-aged adults, and most of the surveys show high prevalence in the 26 to 40 range. After 50, it declines substantially, and essentially people with gray hair like I have typically don't use Kratom. So Kratom use is uncommon in adolescents as compared with alcohol, cannabis, or nicotine, though it does occur. About sex, this is predominantly a male substance. Most people believe that most studies show that 60 to 70% of users of Kratom are males. This contrast with prescription painkiller misuse, which has a pretty even 50-50 gendered distribution. Why? What's going on here? It's thought, it's supposed, it's hypothesized that it has to do with the marketing. Marketing around Kratom is framed around energy, focus, and performance, and that it helps with physically demanding work, fatigue. And so it's thought that some of the marketing is driving more men to use this substance than our female citizens. So the other thing is use is consistently higher among non-Hispanic white individuals. It's lower prevalence among Black and Hispanic populations. We're not really sure why, but this may reflect access to online vendors, head shops, smoke shops, some cultural framing as a herbal supplement. So it's basically under-recognized and under-reported in some groups, primarily the ones that we just mentioned. So it's also interestingly more common among individuals with some college education. It's more common with individuals who are employed, and then with residents of non-urban or semi-rural areas. So this profile is distinct from other substances, not in a profound way, but there are differences. Okay, next one, please. Okay, here's a couple pictures of 7-hydroxykratom products. We just selected these at random off the internet. And what I want to say about this is the stuff that's really scary, the 7-hydroxykratom. And there's reasons for that, and we'll talk about this. But it's important to say, again, the kratom plant itself has no enzymes that create this drug. The leaf is harvested. What the stores that sell this do, they harvest the leaves, they dry it, and we think it's through this drying process that creates the 7-hydroxy-mitragynine. So this is not a naturally made substance by the plant. It's generated by its processing. And so when you do that, when you process and purify these things, there are sometimes contaminants, other byproducts, other substances. So in a way, the 7-hydroxykratom is not really kratom anymore. It's something else, but it cloaks itself in the profile of kratom to market itself, but it's extremely dangerous. So just like saying caffeine is not coffee, caffeine pill having been purified and manipulated is not the same as drinking a cup of coffee. This substance right here, 7-hydroxykratom, is not kratom. It's an active constituent that's isolated from the plant is no longer that plant. Now, what's interesting about these pictures to me is they say right on there, 7-HMZ. The one with the Roxy is fascinating because that's designed to draw your attention, the similarity to roxicodone, prescription opioid. And then I just was fascinated by the one with the skull and crossbones on it. We market it as something that's going to help you and have the skull and crossbones on it. But it's interesting. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So these are highly concentrated isolates. These 7-hydroxy products that I showed the picture of sometimes are up to pure 60% pure 7-hydroxykratom or hydroxymitragynine. This is in very stark contrast to the kratom leaf itself, which has minimal to no, it's actually not detectable in fresh leaves. So 7-hydroxykratom is not really kratom anymore, but you wouldn't know it by going in the store. Now, most of these products are marketed as a chewable tablet, a shot, or a gummy. And again, they're often advertised as kratom, despite actually really no longer being kratom. They represent a serious and significant shift in the market because of the increased risk for toxicity dependent and the dependence, and we'll get to a little bit more, but there's very little to no clinical research on the safety and the regulation of these particular products. Okay, next please. Now, if that weren't bad enough, there are other chemicals that are, I want to say, are adversaries in this field of design. There's another product out there. You'll see it, right? You'll see it advertised right here. Here's a picture of it, called pseudo-mitragynine, pseudo. And this is a chemical rearrangement of the 7-hydroxymitragynine itself. This is completely synthetic. It's this pseudo drug right here is a very strong agonist of the mu receptor. Its potency is believed to be much greater than 7-hydroxy kratom, which I told you is already up to 15 times that of the underlying natural substance. This product is marketed as stronger but safer. This is completely untrue. It has a much higher risk of respiratory depression, of overdose, and of death. The interesting thing about this product here, this pseudo 7-hydroxykratom, is that naloxone doesn't really work that well on it. You have to give multiple doses of naloxone to reverse its effects. Now, we're going to talk a little bit on another slide about the Kratom Consumer Protection Act language, and this product is specifically excluded from that. And I'll say again, this drug is not detected on standard opioid immunoassays, the ones that you're doing in our offices. Testing requires a special panel that's sometimes performed only by governmental agencies. I'm not sure I know exactly who, if anyone, is really able to test for this substance. Okay, next one, please. If that weren't bad enough, there are other synthetically derived and manipulated compounds that are out there and we're going to be confronting. So our future in this field is very bright as the chemists continue to work on these things and design new chemicals. In 2025, there was a research chemical that was discovered and published in online vendor listings. And while it was described a decade earlier, this is now coming into fruition. We're seeing people actually order some of this from these companies, I will say, that manufacture these products. So this doesn't really have a name yet. You see it's MGM-15. And the reason for that, this is so new and so dangerous, it doesn't really have a name yet. It's not really marketed to the public. This is what's coming down the line. So you have to go online pretty much and purchase this from a medicinal chemistry producer. So there are two drugs, actually MGM-15 and MGM-16. They don't have recognized names, but they are out there, and we are going to be confronting these in the months and years ahead of us. So these drugs were developed by companies looking at manufacturing opioid analgesics, but they're going to get out into the wild. These substances are going to make their way into the population, so this is very scary. Okay, next slide, please. So I put together a single slide here we shall have access to, which covers these and sort of covers some of the differences between them. You'll see that the leaf kratom is naturally occurring. It has a partial opioid agonist. It's rare that kratom alone causes respiratory depression. It has a wide safety margin. The naloxone response is variable. You can see all the way on the other, these new drugs, MGM-15 and 16, these highly modified and manipulated chemicals. They don't occur naturally. They're almost full agonists of the mu receptor. They have a very high affinity for it. The risk of respiratory depression is very high. Safety margin is very low. Naloxone typically doesn't work, and their overdose risk is very high. So, yeah, very scary stuff. That slide should help you understand these different chemicals. Next slide, please. Okay, treatment options. Let's talk about this. Is very important. Many of you may not be practicing in the field, but this is important information. So buprenorphine has been shown to reduce withdrawal symptoms from kratom products. Now, the problem is that the evidence for this is limited to basically case reports. What that means is that people like myself who encounter patients with these addictions, treat patients, we submit these case reports, and other medical professionals can follow in our lead. That's useful, but it doesn't really help us understand fully how best to treat. It's not a controlled environment to study these drugs and how they work. There have essentially been very few studies actually in a double-blind, peer-reviewed way studying buprenorphine treatment. Now, so there are case reports. I want to take a second here and just kind of jump off a little bit and talk a little bit about pregnancy. I was asked about this, and so I want to take this slide a chance to do this, about its use in pregnancy. The fact of the matter is that exposure to kratom during pregnancy has caused neonatal abstinence syndrome. These, again, are also case reports. There are infants that have been on multiple occasions described as being born with withdrawal symptoms, and their drug tests for the opioids that we typically see are not present. The symptoms of neonatal abstinence syndrome, many of you may know this, are tremors, high-pitched crying, irritability, feeding problems, and then, necessary treatment, usually in morphine in the hospital. So these findings suggest that in-utero exposure can lead to dependence in a newborn, just with other opioids. Maternal dependence and withdrawal are possible. There's case literature, a little bit about this. There's no full studies. There's not much for us to read. So what I would say to you about, additionally, there's another thing, that's contamination. Again, these substances are not being prepared in approved pharmaceutical facilities, so many times they're concerned. So there's no controlled epidemiologic studies or randomized trials evaluating pregnancy outcomes. There's no standardized exposure levels. The kratom formulations are variable in how they're created. Developmental outcomes are unknown. There is some research that's tracking pediatric development after exposure. But basically, here's what I would say to you. Kratom use during pregnancy poses risks, including dependence on the fetus and needle withdrawal. And so what we tell every patient is you should avoid it during pregnancy for those reasons. So whoever asked that question, I appreciate I was able to address that during that slide. Next one, please. Okay, how about lab testing? Another common question. And this is hugely problematic. Kratom and 7-hydroxykratom won't show up on routine toxicology screens. The test that you're doing in your probation offices and in many cases in your addiction and your other outpatient centers, we use immunoassays in those. So as to my knowledge, none of the rapid testing is present for kratom. If I'm wrong, I've got that wrong, and you've got one, just message me. I'll be happy to do that. But the testing I'm using, we're using, many of you using, do not test for kratom. And the gold testing for kratom alkaloids is confirmatory or formal testing, which, as you know, is liquid chromatography with mass spectrometry or gas chromatography. These are expensive. We'll talk about that in a second. And not impossible, but expensive, time-consuming. And so the conclusion is this. In most clinical, occupational, and probation settings, kratom use will not be detected at all. We don't have any way to do that. You've got one. If someone out there's got one, if you're able to do a rapid test for kratom, if I've got that wrong, then let me know, and maybe we can share this with the group, because that would be incredibly helpful. Now, there's another question out there. Will this cross-react with the substances on our rapid test? So patients say, oh, well, my opioid test is positive, I'm not using, it's probably this energy drink, health drink, it might be kratom. They don't reliably do that. There's not a lot of science on this, but the kratom alkaloids do not reliably cross-react with the opioid immunoassays. So what I'm saying to you, it's highly likely, you can't say it for certain, but if you have a patient whose immunoassay, rapid workplace drug test or test addiction was positive for an opioid and they're saying it's kratom, it's probably not. It's probably not. I can't say for sure. And so the only way to do that would be to do confirmatory testing. Okay, next slide. What about the FDA and regulation of kratom? This is probably a whole separate talk, and we'll try to get through this quickly, but basically here's the situation. In 2016, which wasn't that long ago, you'll see here the FDA first became aware of kratom around 2005, 2008, when they first became aware it was being sold online retail. They put it 4 more years past before they put it on a drugs of concern list. And then in 2016, the FDA tried to classify kratom as Schedule 1. I presume that most of you know what the DEA scheduling looks like, but just to recap it here, Schedule 1 means substances that have no legitimate medical purpose. So think, I don't want to say methamphetamine, cocaine are both Schedule II, but substances that have no legitimate medical purpose. So the FDA thought they would do that. They proposed scheduling a Schedule I, and they were unprepared for the pushback. There was incredible professional public pushback, and the people in this industry who were selling Kratom emphasized its therapeutic and anecdotal use for pain and opioid withdrawal, and the DEA suspended that scheduling mission. They left Kratom in a federally regulatory gray zone where it persists today, honestly. So at the federal level, Kratom remains legal. It's a supplement. It's sold at retail. The FDA really has nothing. The FDA basically continues to issue safety warnings. Regulation of Kratom and these products has been left to the states, and we'll talk about that in a second, because we are doing something about it, just not at the federal level. Okay, next one, please. So in 2017, the FDA declared Kratom an opioid, and it warned of addiction, abuse, and death, even though it wasn't scheduled. So it was a public warning issue. There were important alerts that were sent out. The FDA highlighted cases of addiction, adverse events, and deaths, especially when combined with other substances. And the FDA began coordinating with the DEA and the CDC to track use trends. Kratom was not scheduled federally, and it's still not. The FDA clearly signaled ongoing concern about the safety and abuse potential, urging the public to avoid unregulated products. And that's their position today. The FDA, that this product is they have concerns, and they recommend that you avoid it. So yeah, so this is kind of a weird journey here. The government backed down from the public health. 2019, the HHS, without even an announcement, just withdrew its scheduling thing from several years ago. They just walked away. They didn't even announce that in 2021. And the FDA maintains today that Kratom is an unsafe, unapproved drug, not a supplement. While they don't regulate it, they recommend that you avoid it. Next slide, please. Ready for the next one? Okay, CDC and poison control data. So we think in 2022 that Kratom was implicated in about 800 fatal overdoses, but as anyone who works in this field knows, overdoses and deaths from them are seldom isolated, seldom a single product. So polysubstance use is the norm in these cases. We've seen large increases subsequently, not surprising with its growth, and they think that there were 2,000 poison center control calls in just the first half of 2025. It was 2026. We'll have to check back and see what the poison control centers are doing, but the problematic use of Kratom has been exploding. And I think that's why we have almost 1,000 of you on this call today. So, of course, the forensic data for people who unfortunately succumb to an overdose is that about 6.5% of them involve Kratom as a sole intoxicant, and it's present in some others as well. It's important to remember that these new products, the Kratom leaf itself, can't overdose and die, but the stronger ones, the 7-hydroxy, the pseudo, and these new ones, especially if combined with other sedatives, benzodiazepines, alcohol, can and are fatal. Okay, next slide, please. So there's something called the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. This is a state-level law. It's not present in every state. It was a package of regulations and laws that were produced, and states were free to adopt as they saw fit. This is designed to regulate Kratom as a consumer product rather than ban it outright. The aim of this statute is to protect the public health while allowing adults to access Kratom legally. The key provisions in this Kratom Consumer Protection Act include age restrictions on purchasing, requiring vendors to label the product accurately, especially about the content, to adhere to good manufacturing practices, to ensure purity and prevent contamination, which was a huge problem. And here's the thing. This is not a single law. States differ in how they pick and choose and implement this. The overall intent, again, is just to reduce the risks from adulterated, mislabeled, or unsafe Kratom, not to eliminate it, and make sure that adults who want it have access to it. So what this means for clinicians, law enforcement, probation, and parole is that in states where it's regulated for safety, it's legal to use. In unregulated states where there's no KPCA passed, they can have all these dangerous products. It's very state to state. And we have an audience from across the country. So I have a partial list of the varying state laws, but it wasn't really possible to get it for the entire country today. So, for example, in Ohio, it's been partially adopted. So states can pick and choose some of this. So in Ohio, they took the Board of Pharmacy took the position that they made illegal most kratom products, except for the natural ones that are just kratom. So 7-hydroxy-misuse are illegal. So this illustrates the tension in this policy around this drug. Some lawmakers want a consumer protection model. Regulators tend to move in more restrictive controls. And this tension is played out in each of our states individually. So what I would suggest that you do if you have the interest is just use Google or another search engine for your state and see what the current status of that is, whether your state's considering it or not. One good thing, next slide, please. One good thing about this, as opposed to other things, is there's something called a Global Kratom Coalition. It's a advocacy and education organization with many stakeholders in it. Its mission is to ensure, similarly, that kratom products, especially the natural leaf products, are safe, accurately labeled, and governed by science-based regulations to protect consumers. This is not just a consumer trade group. It's got researchers, clinicians, consumers, and they also distinguish between the natural kratom leaf and then the concentrated synthetic products that we talked about, the 7-hydroxy, the pseudo, and the other ones. So they emphasize the public health risk profiles of here, and this coalition promotes research and engages with policymakers. So this is a useful organization, and if you're politically active in your state, you might look into this organization and see how you can be involved. Okay, I'm going to take a little shift here. We're flying through this. We've got some other stuff to talk about in important questions. So we're going to switch gears here and talk about Tianeptine, which has the name gas station heroin. And that's a crazy name when you think about it. It has that, sorry, but not asking the next slide. It's not called gas station heroin because it's identical or even similar to heroin. It's just because at high doses, it too acts like a potent opioid receptor agonist, and it can produce euphoria, dependence, and withdrawal. So unlike prescription opioids, these products are sold without age restrictions, dosing guidance, or quality controls. These products are not approved by the FDA. The public's been warned not to purchase them, but when you walk into many gas station, convenience stores, vape shops, it's right there on the counter. It's packaged as energy boosters. Next slide, please. What is the stuff? What is Tianeptine? It's a tricyclic compound. So tricyclics were typically used to treat depression, believe it or not. This is technically an antidepressant. It was developed outside of the United States to be used as an antidepressant, but it was never adopted in the United States as an antidepressant. It's a fully synthetic product. It's manufactured by man. At low doses, it's involved with glutamate signaling, supposedly promotes stress resilience and can improve depressive symptoms, anxiety, and stress reactivity. The problem, again, is that at a high dose, it acts as a mu receptor agonist, just like an opioid, indistinguishable. It also has, unfortunately, a very, very short half-life. So this leads to rapid redosing, and then that leads to rapid tolerance and severe physical dependence. The withdrawals are just like opioid withdrawal: agitation, autonomic instability, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, anxiety, even psychosis. So think of it this way: despite being sold as a supplement, Tianeptine behaves pharmaceutically like a short-acting opioid, like oxycodone. So basically, you can walk into a store and buy this product that behaves very similar to oxycodone in a bottle, and that's a scary proposition. That's gas station heroin. Next slide, please. It's not as bad as kratom from a poison control and mortality data. So we see here that it's rising, though. In 8 years from 2015 to 2023, poison control data was about 900, which was in about a 1,400% exposure increase over time. So these folks can be really sick when they call the poison control, when they overdose on it. 40% of them required medical admission. And the FDA adverse events reporting system reports hospitalization, life-threatening events, and at least 2 deaths linked directly to these products that were marketed. So not as bad as kratom, but it's out there and it's very serious. So the CDC had already identified as opioid-like toxicity and withdrawal effects, and there are some fatalities that have been reported in case reports. The limitations around this is we just really don't know. There's so little we don't know. It's the consumers who purchase and take this product typically use other substances. There's not routine testing for it, and it's underreported. So the scope of the problem is really somewhat unclear. Okay, treatment. You can flip to the next slide, please. Same as with Kratom. Tianeptine is not routinely detected on standard drug tests, and screening needs to be intentional. You kind of need to ask about it. And my view is that unless we ask folks about these products, they're unlikely to tell us. The withdrawal syndrome is virtually identical. The standard opioid withdrawal can be severe and is treated identically with the same substances that drugs that we use to treat opioid withdrawal. So from a treatment standpoint, what I want to say to you is the hardest part is figuring out that it's Tianeptine in the first place. It's not going to show up on drug screens. Patients may not tell us because they don't think of it as a drug. You have to screen for it. And so when things don't add up, that's when kind of asking about this may determine if they're actually taking these products. Tianeptine withdrawal looks far more like opioid withdrawal than antidepressant discontinuation. So sometimes they're very severe, and some of these patients need hospitalization for their withdrawal. There's no FDA-approved treatment protocol specific to gas station heroin and Tianeptine. There are, again, case reports of using buprenorphine and methadone, and it's reported to be effective. So for those of you who work in centers treating these diseases, that's a reasonable thing to do. But the science behind it is not yet clear. It hasn't been fully studied. So the key here, in my opinion, is to educate patients and families about the dangers of these substances. And a lot of patients are genuinely shocked to learn that something that's sold as a supplement over the counter can cause severe physical dependence and addiction. So all of us who practice out in this field, and all of our community partners, all of you on this call, need to stay aware as well of state-specific legal changes as there's regulation around this. It's evolving quickly. Next slide, please. So I didn't develop a list. You can check for yourself. Some states, and you'll see them listed here, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, and Ohio, have classified Tianeptine as a controlled or banned substance. Other states, not so much. So check whether your state is moving towards that. But until, we're going to continue to have a problem with this substance until this is more highly regulated. Okay, the third one on the list I wanted to talk about is Phenibut. This is not a huge player, but it's out there, and we need to probably know about it. This is a picture of what it looks like. It's a unique drug. It's a synthetic GABA analog. It was developed originally in the Soviet Union, of all places, as an anxiolytic, meaning as an anxiety-reducing medication. It does produce reduction in anxiety, and it does cause sedation, and it causes mild euphoria. Unfortunately, it's sold online as a nootropic. You'll hear this word, it's a nootropic. What does that mean? So nootropic is any substance that's marketed to enhance cognition or mood. It's not a medical diagnosis. It's not an FDA-recognized category. But this includes supplements, drugs, synthetic compounds, like a brain, just because we say it's a brain-enhancing drug, that's the kind of thing. So when you see this word nootropic, be pretty skeptical. Phenibut is a synthetic compound. It's not a natural supplement. It's marketed as one, but it's not. It's a modified version of the GABA molecule that crosses the blood-brain barrier. It allows it to exert central nervous system effects. So its effect is at the GABA-B receptor for the clinicians in the audience, very similar to another drug out there called baclofen, which you may have heard of, which is a muscle relaxant, which is available and in use. It can cause its own problems. So it can cause, as I said before, anxiety-reducing sedative effects, especially at higher doses. So in the United States, Phenibut is not FDA approved, but it's widely available online. And it's framed as a nootropic or sleep aid, which lowers the perceived risk, but this is a risky drug also. Okay, if someone comes in and says, hey, I've been purchasing this product, this PhenPM online, I'm dependent on it, I'm really struggling, what do we do? So stopping this stuff abruptly can produce severe withdrawal. And so that withdrawal can be very unpleasant with anxiety, tremors, insomnia, hallucinations, and even seizures. But the primary strategy, I'm sorry if I didn't ask for the next slide, I'm sorry, is slow, controlled taper. Now, asking someone to taper something they shouldn't be taking in the first place is always a little awkward as a physician. One option is to substitute baclofen, which is talked about. So for the clinicians out there, if you're not comfortable telling a patient to taper something that they shouldn't be taking in the first place, you could use baclofen to substitute to reduce their withdrawal severity. Meeting these folks with supportive care is critical. Some are very sick. Some require hospitalization for severe agitation and sometimes seizures. So in low dose cases, you could try an outpatient taper in the office, but close monitoring is essential. Counseling and education are vital. And many of the folks who use these products don't perceive it as dangerous. We're teaching them about the risks of over-the-counter and online purchases, an important strategy for all of us to engage in. Okay, next slide, please. The last one I'm going to talk about here, we're kind of nearing the end, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions, is dextromethorphan. So it's usually abbreviated as DXM. And our adolescent children are taking this drug. And so dextromethorphan, we all know it as the over-the-counter cough and cold medicine. Most of them look like regular cough syrup and pills used for cough relief. On the street, unlike some of the drugs we talked about before that don't yet have street names, this one's got poor man's PCP, robo. Getting high on dextromethorphan is called robo-tripping, if you haven't heard that before, or called CCC. I'm not really sure why it's called that. Kind of interesting. I might look it up and try to figure it out. So when it's taken in high doses, it acts as an antagonist at the NMDA receptor, and so this produces dissociative and hallucinogenic effects, and that's why folks, adolescents, take it for the hallucinogenic effects. And if you've never seen dissociation, it's really weird. Folks are having these profound symptoms, but they're awake, their eyes are open, they're just very, very flat. And so there's a disconnect between the effects in their brain and what they're perceiving and how they're appearing. So these effects and its ability to produce hallucinations has led to the misuse primarily by our teenagers. It's called robo-tripping or DXM abuse. So what are the implications for this? So acutely intoxicated dextromethorphan is dose dependent. So a mild ingestion causes nausea, but it can be severe. There can be severe neurologic and cardiovascular effects. Severe outcomes can be present when it's combined with alcohol and other CNS active drugs. This also can develop a tolerance very quickly. Sorry if not asking for the next slide. So tolerance develops quickly, but physical dependence is less common with these drugs than with traditional opioids. The psychological dependence is more common, especially in teens and young adults. It's not the physical dependence, it's the psychological dependence. Management's mostly supportive, monitor for agitation, tachycardia, seizures, behavioral intervention, education about the risks are critical for relapse prevention. And again, same comment, being over the counter does not mean risk-free. Screen your adolescents, your young adults, and another scary drug out there that our teenagers probably are using. So next slide, please. I put together everything here about the presentation that I gave, sort of in a summary form for you. And I thought what I would do, we're going to go to questions here in a minute, but I thought I would preempt the question and answer period by dealing with some questions that have already been asked and continue the talk in that way for a second. So one of the participants asked, are there signs or symptoms that are more unique to Kratom and its related products that we can look for, or are they similar to traditional opioids? And the short answer is no. There's no reliable, unique presenting symptoms that distinguish Kratom addiction from other substance use disorders, opiate use disorders. Now, there is a pattern that you can maybe take a look at. So Kratom dependence presents more as a hybrid syndrome. So it's got opioid-like withdrawal tolerance, compulsive use, and also some stimulant-like effects on mood focus. So there might be some atypical presentation in that way. But what's distinctive about it is no single symptom predominates, that patients report near daily use, They redose throughout the day. They escalate dose over time. They have an inability to skip doses without withdrawal. And the withdrawal symptoms presentation is reported to be not as bad as opiates, but to last longer. The withdrawal from kratom can last over a week. So here's what you want to know about kratom and its presentation. The problem with kratom is going to be the patient looks like they're having opioid withdrawal, but their drug testing is negative. That's the tip-off. That's the tip-off for you to dig in and see if they're taking a kratom product. The negative toxicology is going to be and I saw a question about the diagnosis. That's a great question too. There's no evidence that kratom causes psychosis, severe respiratory depression alone, or profound cognitive impairment. So absence of the drug specimen is going to be the main thing. Okay, let's see. Someone asked about demographic profiles. I think I covered most of that. We talked a little bit about pregnancy, just to rehash again. It's not safe to take kratom in pregnancy for all the reasons that we talked about during the body of the talk. Another caller asked about drug testing. And we'll just reiterate this again. Our routine 5, 10, 12 panel tests do not include kratom. If there's one out there that has it, let me know, because I want to start getting it and using it. Now, occasional false positives, where a patient using kratom but not opiates would test positive for an opiate or oxycodone, has been reported, but it's not common, it's not consistent. So in most of our situations, in the office, in the clinic, in the workplace, in probation and parole, kratom use will not be detected by rapid testing. It has to be found by confirmatory testing. And the second point on that is, what does it cost and how would I go about doing that? The costs of confirmatory mass spec testing for kratom can be expensive. It can range from $100 to $400. An expanded panel done for confirmatory testing that includes kratom can be from $200 to $600. And as I didn't know this, but I found out that hair or blood confirmation, which is not uncommon and can be done, it's even more expensive, from $300 to $800. The pricing depends heavily on the lab, turnaround time, whether it's a standalone confirmatory test or a broader panel. So confirmatory testing for kratom is significantly more expensive than routine drug screening. Inexpensive, as you know, less than $25. So how do we order this? So you're going to have to order confirmatory testing through your hospital, through a commercial reference lab, or a toxicology lab like Quest, LabCorp, and at National Medical Services. And of course, you're going to have to require a clinical justification. And reference labs are typically available to each of us in America, but they're not available rapidly in our offices. So this is a real problem. How long do they take? Confirmatory testing can take 2 to 7 days, but sometimes longer. It is feasible. It's always used in, for instance, legal cases or in court-ordered toxicology, sometimes workers' comp and accident investigations. Other settings in which confirmatory testing is useful is research studies, clinical. In addiction specialty clinics, we use confirmatory testing routinely. In an ED, in most of our offices, it's not going to be that helpful. Another caller asked, we've seen patients test positive for traditional illicit substances and claim it was from kratom, Tianeptine, energy boosting drinks sold in gas stations. Again, it's not impossible, but it's variable and uncertain. Most of the time when someone says that, that's not true. And without a confirmatory testing, you can't really be sure. So another caller asked intelligently, can kratom be used safely, recreationally for pain? And is there a safe way for an individual to use kratom? This is a great question, and I want to spend some time on it. And the answer to that, the simple answer, is it depends on what you mean by safe. Does kratom have a standardized dose? No. Is it purity regulated? No. Does it have a known therapeutic index? No. Are there large controlled trials to study it? No. Does it have predictable drug interactions? No. Does it have an established safety pregnancy profile? No. So from a medical regulatory standpoint, kratom cannot be described as safe. And that's the position of the Food and Drug Administration, National Institute on Drug Abuse. So why do people perceive it as being safe? And this is really important when you engage with people. They do get relief of pain. it does reduce their opioid withdrawal symptoms. They do have improvement in mood and energy, and they are able to function at work. Not all of them experience intoxication. So there is this conversation out there that patients will say it's safer than opioids, it's natural, and I've been using without problems. That perception is understandable, but it's incomplete. And so the other final question is it being researched? And the answer is yes. There is some trials that are ongoing about Kratom and its safe use. And so there's only, as of 2022, there are only a handful of clinical studies that are ongoing about its pharmacology and its safety and its effectiveness. So there's big gaps in its, in with the knowledge about Kratom and how to use it safely. And these are, again, mainly observational studies or small pilot studies. So it hasn't been studied as fully as we need to be able to recommend that patients can use it. So I'm pretty much at the end of my talking portion, and I tried to address the serious questions that were raised. So I think at this point, as we're winding down, got a few minutes left, let's take the final questions and let everyone get on with their day.
Thank you, Dr. Schmidt. We do still have a few minutes left. If anyone has any remaining questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat for us, and we'll try to get them answered. Dr. Schmidt, we did have one question. I know we might have touched on it, but can you reiterate for everyone how to handle the DSM diagnosis for Kratom, or what can we enter patients
Yes,
into
that's a really
OTP
good
or
question.
NCP?
That's a really good question. Now, my practice is in primarily in OTPs, in a federally regulated opioid treatment program, and so I sigh and pause when I say this. I'm pretty sure that in the DSM manual there is a diagnosis for other substance, and sometimes we'll use that. But in my setting in the OTP, to be able to dispense buprenorphine and methadone, we are typically using the typical F1120 opioid use disorder. Now, my justification for doing that is because of the FDA's position that Kratom is an unregulated opioid and its chemical effects. It's not a typical opioid in the chemical way, but that's what most of the time when we're using to justify prescribing buprenorphine, because the issue is to prescribe buprenorphine or methadone to a patient, you are supposed to have an opioid use disorder to use those medications. So that's what we're doing. It's in a gray zone. So I use opiate use disorder, but there is another diagnostic category out there called other. I wish I could get the code for you, and maybe there's a way to get that out to everyone if I can look it up. But there is a code up there for other. If you're like in an OBOT office or an outpatient setting that's not in an OTP and it's not as important, you could use that. But if you're prescribing medication to a patient, I think you're on solid ground to say that classifying this as an opiate or not is kind of irrelevant. Its effects are like an opiate. The FDA commissioner has said that Kratom is an opiate, and so that's what we're using. I'm using, in my guidance, is F1120, the typical opiate use disorder. So I hope that's responsive to your question.
Absolutely, Dr. Schmidt. We've got another question here. Is there any research that you know of on whether or not Kratom impacts an adolescent brain long-term or differently than it might affect adults?
I'm unaware of any. It doesn't mean that something's been done, but the research on Kratom is limited anyways, so I would be surprised. And if you'll remember the Kratom Protection Act, one of the goals of it was to protect adolescents from acquiring it. So I would be surprised if that's been studied, but it's an interesting question that's worth looking up, and I will for sure do that, and I would encourage you to do as well. It's a very important question, I suspect, but I doubt that it's been carefully studied because Kratom has not been yet studied in adults. In most of our states, we're trying to prevent adolescents from getting this in there. Most of the states are trying to prevent adolescents with age restrictions from purchasing it. So I'm highly doubtful that that's been done, but it's an interesting question. I wish I had a better answer for you. Very insightful.
Alrighty, that is about our time for today. Thank you, Dr. Schmidt, and thank you to everyone for attending our virtual forum today.